Hi, and welcome to another episode of Architecture of Change. And I am your host, Leanne Meyer. This season, wow, this season has always, it's so funny about timing. This season has always been planned. But with the landscape, especially the political landscape that has now really shifted in the past month so dramatically. We knew things were coming, we knew things were changing, but it shifted so dramatically globally. This equity and evolution series, as it was initially planned, has evolved. It really, really has evolved. Because originally, this episode was meant to be about DEI accountability. However, it's kind of morphed into DEI accountability beyond policy. And the reason why, I mean, notwithstanding, I think we're all aware of what's happening in the US right now. The shift into, extreme right politics is definitely grabbing more of a hold across Europe, that there has to be, DEI is in many cases an easy phrase to latch onto for so many reasons. And I'm going to start with, and I've talked about this in previous seasons, but I kind of want to take a step back, because the whole concept of DEI has been conflated and has become a shorthand for many different interchangeable injustices. So and this has been in both for good and for bad, but it's always ended up being harmful. And what do I mean by that? As in, from corporate accountability to avoid saying we want to focus and look at racial equity, they packaged it into DEI. And that conflation has had that really horrific effect of a lot of the backlash to DEI being focused on racism primarily, because of this conflation of DEI only means race. But then secondarily, what we're now seeing is that narrative has been, and that conflation has meant that the pushback around DEI and undermining what DEI is has led to the narrative that DEI has only ever been there to serve the purpose and the benefit of Black people. And that is the crux in many cases, and the difficulty with the conversations that have happened and have been happening and will continue to happen, because this conflation is causing a level of deliberate misunderstanding and a level of deliberate misinformation around the purpose of DEI, what has happened previously, and the benefits going forward. And I think this is where we have, and I don't think it's a realization, and then I made a short video around, corporate shushing, is that a lot of organizations that do not believe in equitable practice in the first place have created policies and governance internally that has no desire to embed any sort of equitable practice in their business. So the use of the phrase diversity, equity, and inclusion was, to all intents and purposes, just a coat of paint on a rotten wall that slowly, the damp was always going to come through. Because if we look back, if you are really, really trying, and I think of, you can think of anything, whether it's, if you're really trying to achieve a goal and you keep doing the same thing and nothing works, then it usually speaks to the methodology that's being that's being used or whatever you're doing is not, capitals NOT, is not clearly thought, it's not clearly thought out, but is not right. And in my kind of 4-step methodology around, embedding gender equity, but embedding any sort of equity within an organization, the recalibration, it's the DARE methodology. So it's define, it's diagnose, assess, recalibrate, embed. And when you get to this recalibration part, it's always about defining what the problem is and refining the methodology. And most organizations have defined the problem, but have not refined their methodology because there was never really the intention. There was never really the intention to make any changes. But the creation of policies and governance around DEI gave the impression, gave the feeling that this is what has happened. And when we talk about the backlash against DEI, and I've said this continuously and I stand by this, the backlash around DEI, where people were like, I feel excluded, or I feel because I'm a white male, I feel excluded and I feel as though, this is unfair to me, is because the execution was faulty. The execution was lacking. Because if you're really concerned with, and this is where the architecture of change comes in, if you're really concerned with understanding systems, and not just understanding systems, but also communicating said systems in implementing equitable practice and equitable policies, it should no way feel as though somebody is being excluded and or undermined because you've explained the systemic barriers that are there. Therefore, creating equitable opportunities is not either a zero-sum game, but it is not a subtraction or an unfair weighting or a skew in favor of minoritized and marginalized groups. It's recognizing the advantage that the system has given those who are not minoritized and marginalized. But it also means that the policies in a lot of performative companies, because they have not worked, it cannot be used as an excuse to say, yeah, these are all DEI hires, because the system wasn't even implemented in a way that would have allowed that to happen. That's not what happened. And in many cases, it's not a policy, but it is a system. If we think about the system of capitalism, we do not shout capitalism every single day, but everything we do is embedded within the system of capitalism. We cannot avoid it. We cannot avoid it. It is just a fact. We live within capitalist systems, and therefore everything that we do is based upon that system. And it's the same around, internal policies, which is, if your organization, or if you as a CEO, and if you as a CHRO or head of people and culture, head of talent and development, if you're scared about not using the word or the acronym DEI anymore, you don't need to be. And the reason why I say you don't need to be is because embedding something means that it still works in the absence of a name. Like most things still work, and we don't always have to name the elephant to know that things work according to those principles. And minoritized and marginalized groups know that to an even greater extent. The accountability that needs to be held now is that internal accountability, where you have those meetings and you say, look, we understand that we need to continue with these changes, but we also understand that we cannot afford to dither about in our decision making. We cannot afford in the same way that we were before, where we had external support. We had external legislation that required this of us, that allowed us to go through 10 meetings back and forth, make decisions, not, excuse me, that's not possible anymore. The accountability internally beyond policy requires speed now. It requires a willingness to define and refine within a shorter time frame than you have ever done before. Because as I've always maintained, and I will still continue to maintain, behind DEI are people's lives who continue to experience injustices daily within the workplace and without the workplace. So the accountability now is on an individual level, as a manager, whatever you may or may not have been doing before, it is now time to double down as a manager, to go out there and be like, how can I provide you with support? How, and when I say how, i.e., let's build you a very clear pathway for your job. If there's ever been a time where it has been opaque, let's build clarity and transparency. If you are going to, when you're talking to the person who reports to you in your team, and you recognize that there are stereotypes that they will be facing, how can I, even though I as your manager may know that you're amazing, how can I make sure that that same messaging is there in all the places that you need it to be? Namely, I am going to confirm, affirm verbally and also in written that you're delivering, that you can do it. There are so many ways to hold accountability in continuing to help fight stereotypes, biases, outright discrimination when you are in a role of leadership. Because the accountability now is part of what your makeup should be if you are truly, truly a believer of equitable practice within your organization. If you're truly a believer in equitable practice, not just within your organization, but in life in general. Because equity and believing in equitable practice is not something that can be confined just to the workplace. It has to go above and beyond that. And the accountability, if you are the person who, if you're reporting to somebody in the same situation, you flip that conversation that we just had as an example. And we say, you go to your manager and say, hey, look, this is the situation we're in. I don't want to ever be in the situation that somebody feels emboldened, A, to call me a DEI hire, but B, to say that I do not deserve my place here. And as my manager in supporting that, I also need for you to make sure that is clearly communicated, not just you, but in our employee, in our employee system. In all of these spaces. And one of the biggest topics that's always spoken about is allyship, right? For anyone who has called himself an ally or has been named an ally, this is also your shining moment. This is also your shining moment. Because in the absence of requiring it, where do you stand and what do you choose to do? In the absence. Because the reality is loads of people have been reactionary, and that's normal. That's a normal thing. You couldn't get certain funding, etc., etc. But without it, and we've seen all the tells. We've seen the organizations within the US who have said, no, okay, now that we don't need to do DEI, we're not going to do DEI. The chief diversity officers have been removed or given another job within the organization. We're seeing all of these changes. But even within those organizations, it doesn't mean that there's no accountability. It doesn't. It shouldn't mean that there's no accountability. For those who still work at those organizations as minoritized and marginalized groups, still hold your manager accountable. Your leaders might not feel so, but at the end of the day, an organization is comprised of individuals and your contribution still counts. And it is a fundamental right, whether it's believed or not, it's a fundamental right that you should still be able to feel as though your workplace is a place that you feel safe. And not just psychologically, also physically. Also physically. Because the seeming lack of accountability or the willingness, I would say, to poo-poo and dismiss DEI does not mean that these organizations and also the individuals within these organizations should not be held accountable. Absolutely not. But the other part about it is that, going back to my original point, is that when it's been smoke and mirrors, they weren't doing anything to make the changes. They weren't doing anything that was genuine to make the changes anyway. So if you're in those organizations, the reality is that your daily life probably hasn't changed, or probably won't change to the extent at work that you think it was, because they weren't really doing anything. It was the paint over the rotten wall. The damp was always showing through again, because the fight was still there, the fight to be seen, the fight to progress, the fight for acknowledgement. Because for a lot of these organizations, it was just a label, but it was never meant to be a practice, and it was never something that was taken seriously. And that, for me, is it's going to be the interesting part, right? It's going to be the how do we go forward now? And on an individual basis, how we go forward now, first and foremost, is, and this sits very much within, the lifestyle architecture piece of the advisory work that I do, which is take time, really meaningful time, to create space for yourself to breathe. Because there is a lot in the news, there is a lot going on. If you're somebody who works in DEI and you're based outside of the US but have US, counterparts, there is a lot of conversation, there is a lot of legal implications. There are so many people questioning their careers, their identity, the work that they've done. Has it been a waste of time? The answer to all these questions are absolutely not. It's never been a waste of time. Your contribution is super important, but your ability to navigate those waters right now as we move forward, as we start to see the sifting process happen, as people start to reveal themselves. The first step is take care of yourself, but if there's one and then there's a 1A, the 1A is take the time to observe. Don't let people put you into conversations about what you think about things. Don't let people ask you what they should be doing, in the sense of, what do you think I should do? What do you think I should do? If you don't have an answer for yourself, then you probably don't have an answer for anybody else. Take the time for you. Observe. Whatever your real reactions might be, keep those for your friends. But within the corporate space, do not give too much away. Do not say too much. Just observe. Watch the behaviors. Watch the slips of the tongue. The things that come out when people haven't really understood who is who. Who has potentially been the obstacle that you never realized was the obstacle, but they were playing along because they knew that if they played along, if they were the head of the ERG, it would look great and they would get another external position. I talk about that in my book. People who are not for gender equity but are heads of female ERGs while stamping on other women within the organization and displaying you know, anti, and all the anti behaviors, but use DEI as a stepping stone to build a larger career? Who is revealing themselves? Who is that person that said they were an ally but now has taken a few steps back and has fallen back into the meritocracy fallacy that DEI has been exclusionary, that DEI has not really been successful because it has skewed and actually allowed unqualified people to make it. We obviously know that that is not the case, but listen to those behaviors, listen to the slight changes in people's language who are still claiming that they are for equitable practice. Because that is going to be the part where you start to be able to think about, as an individual, as a leader, how do I navigate this new world in terms of people feeling bolden to really share their real opinions? And potentially, how do I navigate seeing people for who they really are, not who they've pretended to be? But conversely, look at who these new people are that are outraged, disgusted, and now feeling bolden to speak up. You don't always have to do all the speaking up, but taking the time for yourself, taking the time to observe before you take any sort of action will be critical when external policies no longer support the promotion of equitable practice. Because as we continue, and I'll still refer back to the Power and Progress season and talking, and I recommend you go and watch it if you have time, but coming back to this concept of progress and pushback and the inevitable dance of the two. Yes, we are in extreme times. No question about it. We are in extreme times. And that means that the pushback is more extreme than we could have ever imagined or believed would have been possible. But that doesn't mean, and I don't know the extent to which, or where it can always come from, because I never like to make false promises. But I still believe in my heart of hearts that there is still hope. There is still hope somewhere. And what did they say? Hope always dies last. I still believe that there's hope, and I still believe that there is still progress to be made. I still believe in the power of community. I still believe in the power of good common sense, and I believe in the power of humanity. There are so many things that I still believe in. And I hope you do too, even though we're in this time where we are seeing very inhumane behaviors. The outright dismissal of not just equitable practice, but the outright dismissal of humanity. And it's a lot to swallow. And it's a lot to swallow, and it's a lot to continuously see and continuously be bombarded with. But I will say that under all of that, I still remain hopeful. Because time and time again, we've proven ourselves to be capable of extraordinary things. And coming back to this part around architecture, like everything, things need planning, time, observation, because I still believe, and I think I say this every time, that today's plans can be tomorrow's reality. And I still stand by that. And throughout this series of equity and evolution, I'll delve more into kind of systems what equity can mean for us on an individual level, collective level, institutional level, but how through all of that we can try to maintain our sanity and our humanity, because it is not easy to see the things that are happening and be unaffected. That's just not possible. So as a final word, I would say I am still hopeful that we can do more. I'm still hopeful that we can build community and create change. And I'm still hopeful that there are so many individuals and organizations that still believe in, and people, just, basically each human. I think that there's still many of us that believe in not just equitable practice, but just society, an equitable society, a resilient society, and that there are many of us that still want to work together to achieve that. So I hope that after this podcast, no matter where you are, no matter what you're feeling, that there's still that it's left you with a ray of light, or that it's left you with things to consider, a couple of things to how to navigate the workplace, a couple of things to think about. But ultimately, that all is not lost. And although it feels like it, and for so many reasons, and I think this is across the globe, it feels like it. Yeah. So thank you for taking the time, as always, to listen. A different pace today. This series is definitely a different pace, but I still hope it serves to help restore, recalibrate, and just provide a different perspective and food for thought. So this has been The Architecture of Change, and I am Leanne Meyer, your host.